Calling the Parks and Recreation Committee meeting to order. We have a quorum present. First of all, I will ask if you have any comments or suggestions. I see none, so I will continue to move on. I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes from the July 5th meeting. Motion made by Alder Watson, second by Alder Killian. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. I'm a yea as well. Motion passed. Number 4 on the agenda, discussion and possible action on the city tree planting and preservation manual update. We are excited to have the city forester, John Cahan, here today, and I'll turn that over to Jamie, and she can turn it over to John.
Okay, this was brought up at our, if you don't recall, it was brought up at our last meeting by a concerned citizen. But it was a very good reminder as an update with a new Parks Committee that we have this document in place and that we try to work by it, but part of it also comes, so it's in your packet, scrolling up to it. This was put in place in 2019 as just it was an exercise with a consultant that the city had hired to work basically on the Thomas Street project, but also then to try to get all of the different planting guidelines and specifications that we had already been using. Our past couple of city foresters had been using a number of different guidelines and regulations, but none of it was in a document. So that's what this document's for. Now, Mr. Cahan, our city forester, is fairly new to us too, so he's getting used to, or this is, I think, one of the first times he's seen this document too, as we brought it forward to him, and a lot of it is just general practices. But I know when it was put together in 2019, one of the big concerns with it was making sure that this had guidelines for developers when they came in and did different projects within the city, and also had some different alternatives or some options when we were doing street reconstruction. So we have our Assistant City Engineer, Alan Wazalowski, here also to answer any questions, and him and John work together on these street reconstructions, which is where I think some of these questions have. So just real briefly, this is the document that we have. Like I said, it was 2019. It was kind of based off of a number of other communities' documents as well. There's a lot of information in here. It's meant more of a guideline for internal staff, but it's written as such where if we have a homeowner call and want to know, how to plant a tree, it's got some tree planting guidelines in here. It's got some lists of species that we recommend if they're under power lines or if they're in certain areas. Now that's something that has to be updated quite often as we get disease and insects and stuff in town, but it has some guidelines to go off of that are general. Ultimately, we also want our homeowners and our developers to work directly with John as our city forester to make sure that they're following through on any of the guidelines that we set forth, if there's any questions, if there's places that they can't plant trees, that we want them to, or that we don't want them to and they think they can, and what some of that give and take will be. So this really goes along with, we do have a municipal code, chapter 12.56, that's specific to street trees, and in that municipal code it gives our city forester the authority to implement that code and to work with homeowners and developers and anybody in the city when it comes to street trees, whether it's planting, removal, pruning, anything like that. It speaks to that. So it gives him also authority to work with our police department to enforce the ordinance if there's somebody that has removed trees illegally or is doing something like, hanging something in our trees that's going to cause them to be girdled or hurt in the long run. So I'm not going to go through every single part of this, but it does have some tree planting standards, kind of goes some dialogue or diagrams for it. And like I said, this is something that is a policy, it's not an ordinance, so these are guidelines. It is something that we will have to stay on top of to update from year to year as best practices in the forestry realm change. So it includes that. It includes different, plantings that you could use. We have been using in the city a lot of bare root planting stock for one, survivability, but also it's cost, and it really is cost. You'll see that when I bring my budget forward and the request that John has that we're putting forward with just the cost of trees and the replacement needs we have. But it's a tree that works. We have general maintenance, watering, mulching, pruning, fertilization, staking, different locations for planted trees based on how they should be planted spacing wise, how big they're going to be, distance from infrastructure. So this is to help. We try to keep in mind the long-term viability of the street and the sidewalks and anything that's in its way as well, because we don't want the trees that are in our boulevards to cause any issues with the streets. Now, as we get into talking about street reconstruction, one of the things we have in the city is a lot of old trees. There's some very, very large old trees that may have been planted in areas where they probably maybe shouldn't have been planted because the boulevard may have been too narrow, or there's just not enough space with the way the house is, how wide we want the street. So I'll let John and Alan kind of talk to that and what they look at when we do a street reconstruction. Like I said, we have the recommended street trees, undesirable street trees, protection policies. So this is where we'll get into in just a little bit when it comes to the street reconstruction. I'm going to go through that really fast. This is where we work with developers on new development, tree planting, and removal. We are working with a developer that did some illegal tree removal out on the west side of town. That continues to be an issue, and we've had to implement the municipal ordinance. John is working with our city attorney on how to deal with this, so it is something that we've had to put in place. Recommended soils, so that helps just with the survivability of the tree. Boulevard plantings, tree removal policy. So like I said, I'm not going to read through all of this because hopefully you read it. It was in your packet, but it is a really pretty in-depth policy guideline that is just helped with tree care in our city, whether it's us or as homeowners or developers. So some things we don't want, we don't want topping in the area where they're cutting off the top of the tree and just leaving it. Some other maintenance practices, and then there's references of where some of this came from, as well as, like I said, the small tree planting list. And this is something that is a guideline. We do have to probably, John and I will have to look through this and make sure that these are still, 2019 was a few years ago, so we want to make sure that this is still the list that we want to have in here and updated. Undesirable tree species. We don't want anybody to plant ash anywhere in the city because we're trying to remove the ash for the emerald ash borer. So there's a list of there, and some of them are weak trees. Storms come through. We've had a lot of storm damage, so that's what we're trying to avoid there. There's some different appendices on this is what we'll talk about with the street reconstruction. And then if they want to plant a tree within the public area, we've got a permit that they can do. And then the rest of it is actually that ordinance, which we are also going to look at. We're going to update a few of our ordinances towards the end of the year. We'll be reviewing this one as well to make sure that it does cover everything we need it to cover when it comes to caring and managing for our street trees. So with that, before we get to the street reconstruction item that was brought up, do you have any questions on this particular document?
I don't have a question, but I just have a comment that I really appreciate this document because I had some trees that I had to have taken down last year because of the storms, some maples, and they weren't sugar maples. And so I've been doing kind of a lot of research on native trees that are good. And anyway, this was really handy also for me, so I'll just say I highly recommend it as well. I thought it was really handy. So thank you to those who created it.
Thank you. Okay, so I think one of the big concerns is that has come up, and not really for this document, but because it's kind of covered in this document, and I think where there was some questions at the last meeting is when we do street reconstruction, it is like I said, we have some really large, beautiful trees, and when you go through and do a street reconstruction, like 4th Avenue, I think we'll use, we have some pictures of just the requirements of what it takes to actually do the work on that street, and the fact that there's only a certain amount of area to work in, only a certain amount of width for the boulevard, and then the size of the trees, and what it takes. That's where Alan can talk about what it takes to reconstruct a street, what he looks at, and then how he works with John on when they go out and review those trees and decide, you know, should this tree be saved, should this not. There are some options sometimes where, you know, if you have a boulevard tree and you're putting in a new sidewalk, you could go around the tree. Some of the limitations with that may be that we don't have enough of the road right away within that, and we'd have to purchase some of that right away from that homeowner, and some of the areas there. And then there are some areas where we definitely can work around the trees, but there are also streets where I think like 4th is that one that we pretty much had to take everything out. So I'm going to leave it up to John. I'm going to have him come up, and with Alan, I guess you can take team. We didn't really like rehearse this or anything as to what we were going to talk about. We just knew that there were some questions, and kind of talk about our street reconstruction policy. Is when we do have to reconstruct a street, it's really because the infrastructure of the street needs to be fixed in whatever that is, whether it's curb and gutter, whether it's sewer, whether it's, you know, any of the infrastructure in it. So that's where that is the number one part for our citizens, to get that fixed. And then with it comes, you know, trees are of value to our homeowners, so whether we can save the trees or not save the trees. And then when we come in and replant the street, what we consider in order to get maybe that canopy back. So can you both talk through your process of when you have to redo a street, and when you look at the trees, how you communicate and how you make that call? Putting them on the spot.
Sure. We've talked about this in SISM before, and some of you members, I don't know if any of you guys were on SISM or not. In the past, we've talked about street trees and such, but when we get a project that comes in, we go out and survey the road, and we pick up every tree, diameter, species. It's real, you know, and its diameter, so we know on a plan sheet where it lays in the road. And we have that all drawn up, and then we look at, I don't look at species so much. That's the city forester who goes through. So when we look at it from engineering wise, we look at it how close it is to the curb and whether it's outgrown. Say you have a 4-foot boulevard, and if the tree's 4 feet, you know, in diameter, it's not gonna make it. And we also look at lateral locations. So obviously everybody has a lateral that runs to their house or business. So you have a lateral that runs from your sanitary sewer, you have a lateral that runs from your water main. If those laterals run underneath a tree or within a close proximity, that tree gets removed because a new lateral is going to be installed to the house. So we can't have the contractor digging right next to a tree, you know, a huge tree and an 8-foot deep trench right next to it for safety reasons. Also, for future maintenance of that lateral, you know, if you wouldn't want that lateral underneath the tree or right next to a tree, because if you have to come to maintain that, then the homeowner would be responsible for cutting that tree down, because the homeowner owns the sanitary lateral from the house all the way to the main. So there has been talk, and so that's kind of the way it gets. So when we go through and we do a plan, we have trees shown in the plan that are removed because of engineering. So when we say because of engineering, we say because of the lateral location or the size. And then we also show trees when John or his predecessors would go through, they would identify. Well, I guess he can talk about what he identifies when he looks at a tree.
Appreciate it, Alan. When we go through that process, obviously you guys put through all your plans, they put everything together on paper, and they notify me. I already have the plans for next year of what streets are being reconstructed. So once they have their plans actually printed out and set in stone, we can go through and look at those trees by how aggressive that reconstruction plan is. So if they're doing a complete reconstruction, like say as on 4th Avenue, they're doing laterals, they're doing mains, they're doing curb, they're doing sidewalk, they're doing everything there, that changes how we address removing those trees. If it's more, say, just curb and gutter, something a little lesser project, we can look at different species, what can handle those types of circumstances. So in the case of 4th Avenue, when we look at those plans, look at the tree species that are there, we cannot dig within those parameters of those trees until have them be stable. So we look at those two parameters with trees as A, stability. Can they handle those roots being removed and still stay standing? And two is survivability. Certain species can't handle amounts of digging. An example, sugar maple, very much digging it all around sugar maple will not be able to handle that. They'll slowly decline and die over time. So look at those parameters and say what trees can stay, what will need to go to continue and finish the project that they're doing. Fortunately, the smaller trees we have, those typically do fairly well. As Jamie was saying, a lot of our streets that are under needing reconstruction are where our older neighborhoods are. We have our larger, big, over-mature trees, what we call a tree when it's beyond its average age range within the city streets. But those trees at that point, damage they can't handle quite as well, and the structural stability, again, is a big concern for us, as we just saw in our last storms. Some of the trees that we had actually root pruned for sidewalk replacement, some of those actually came over, and you can see right what that was done. So that's a concern on our side.
Yeah, so these are pictures. John had sent me of 4th Avenue just to bring up as an example. I mean, the street had to be quite widened, right, in this area? Or not
No,
widened, but
it's-
there was a lot of work.
There's sewer, water, and storm. So when the contractor comes through, he basically digs 3 trenches. So the water main's typically 7 feet deep, 7.5, 8 feet deep. And then, sanitary sewer can be anywhere, average probably 9, can go up to 12. And then there's a big storm sewer in there too. So basically you're digging 3 trenches, at least 8 feet deep through that street. Typically water's on one side, not always typically, and then sanitary's in the middle and storm's on the other. So you're digging the street up 3 times to come through. And then you're removing the curb and gutter from the one side of the tree. And you're removing this, on 4th, we're taking all the sidewalk out because it was in horrible shape. So you're removing the sidewalk from one side, you're removing the curb and gutter from the other side. And then in a lot of situations, there could be a driveway on the other side of the tree and possibly a lateral on the other side of the tree or on the same side. So at a minimum here, you're removing or you're digging on 2 sides of the tree, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. So that's what we have to look at, how many sides of the tree we're digging on. John Moore does. And then, so that provides for that stability. And then just during construction, we do have specs in our specs that we go over with the contractor with tree protection. Is that always done? I did go out today and look at 4th Avenue, and I did see some things that could be improved, but we do say in the spec, and we try to enforce the 10-foot perimeter around the tree. Now, obviously from that picture, that didn't get enforced. But, we tell the contractors not to park their equipment under a tree because we don't want the burn from the exhaust of the big backhoes or the whatever, the dozers, burning the tree. But in the same sense, and I talked to John about when you're digging a trench through, you need to be in line with that. And when that backhoe comes through and he's digging, at some point he's going to be underneath that tree with the exhaust pointed up. And we do see tree burn. And we try to minimize that. We don't want them to park underneath the tree, but yet they need to get their work done. So there can be some damage that way. We also have in the spec, and we have done it before, where the contractor swings his boom or swings any Now, there are some times where they crack a branch or something, and Parks will come and trim those trees after the fact. We're talking when they swing their boom or when they swing and they damage the bark, and Parks, John will come out and he'll say that tree is damaged, then we charge them. So we have charged in the past liquidated damages when a contractor damages a tree, and then we recover that in the contract. So we do have that language in there also. We do not fence our trees under construction projects. We try and enforce the area around the tree, like a 10-foot zone around it, but we don't go so far as fencing it because, like I said, if you're digging through on each side and digging, that would be pretty burdensome. The fence would be down more than it's up, to be quite honest with you. So that's just a little bit about the construction and what we have in our specs to protect the trees.
So John, in this case, this tree's staying, right? And did you choose
Correct.
that because of the size and just?
Correct, the size, and plus there isn't going to be a digging directly within proportion to the size of that tree, not close enough. So that tree we're going to give the opportunity to survive.
John, how many trees were cut down?
I don't have the exact number, but I know I'd say there's at least 90% of those trees down that stretch came down. The majority of them came down. Most of them are large trees.
Okay.
Yep, so it's quite a different look there, stark difference.
So then, go ahead.
No, I was just no, you go ahead and then I can ask.
Well, I was going to just ask him to explain. So after the street reconstruction now can you explain our planting plan of how we would go back and assess and replant some of that area for future?
Yes, once they're done, I know in the past, and actually on the Fifth Avenue reconstruction of Fifth Avenue South, it was last year was completed. They actually worked, Andy, my predecessor, worked with engineering to put in some planting root barriers. So along the sidewalks to try to encourage those roots to get lower as opposed to creating issues with our sidewalks. So that was done there. I know we're thinking about the idea here. I'm not sure that we're confirmed on it now. That's excellent. See, they've been super to work with. So we're looking at doing that just to encourage those roots to stay lower, to avoid conflicts with the sidewalks, to kind of start there. But going forward, once they are completed with their pouring and everything is done, I'll go back through and remark new planting sites. So we will adjust according to where the driveway approaches are, where the carriage walks are, all our parameters. We'll make sure we put trees in proper places. So we'll go through and plant all those, mark all those spots. Then we'll go ahead and order trees and be planted next spring as the plan. Most trees we planted in spring, some will be in fall depending on species. But that's our plan for next year. So we'll go back and see where those utilities are. Where are the water lines? Where are the sewer lines? Usually they're together. But look where those utilities are, make sure we avoid those. So for future work, those trees are placed properly. So like I said, those trees are planted majority in spring. Some we do get in bare root, and some of those will wait through our system, grow a little bit during the summer, and be put in place in fall. So that's kind of the process.
Any questions for Alan or John? Alder Killian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one or two. So has the department or any staff explored any kind of novel methods or novel methodologies that other areas or geographies in the country may be using in terms of this issue? I just imagine, particularly in areas where there are increased concerns about heat and the ability for trees and canopies to mitigate some of those impacts. Maybe, cutting down all the trees wasn't very preferable or good option in those areas. Do you know if there's perhaps anything novel that anyone's been trying that might help retain or more quickly replace what's been lost, whether that's perhaps trees with a faster growth rate or what have you, anything to shorten the time of recovery?
Sure. Actually, that's a wonderful question because we actually just had the city of Green Bay reach out to us with some questions about what we're doing because they're having the same, concerns we are, the exact same concerns. How do we do better? How do we grow? How do we try to maintain our tree canopy and green space? So they've reached out to us. We're trying to coordinate and work together, come up with some better ideas that work for the Midwest and for our specific area. As far as some novel ideas, you look out west, they're kind of leading the front on some of those things. They're actually purchasing rights into properties to go around trees and sidewalks. They're doing some different items out there, really building some roads around big, massive trees. We're talking redwoods and really large trees that are completely irreplaceable ever. So things like that. So they're looking at options like that, but it takes, funds from the city and willing residents to do those things. So there's some options we can look at there. As well as when you start looking at the soils, placing back into, obviously they're building the sidewalk and streets to conform to handle the structure of the sidewalk and the street. So they're compacting that soil, doing things that their structures can handle. You start looking at different soil things like, say there's soil cells, which would be really great to do, quite expensive. But basically what it is it's a plastic cell in the ground, your infrastructure can sit on it. You put regular soil in there, good soil, and the tree roots grow through there. So that's an option you can look at. Costs tend to be a bit restrictive, but there are some options out there, some things you can look at. There's also structural soil, which we used down the 400 block, I believe, some time back. There is a concern with that it's basically big rock, and they put nice soil in between. The rock holds the structure, then the roots can get between. The only concern we find with that is you get less roots in there because there's less soil volume to move, and those less amount of roots actually get larger, so you're still getting the heaving. But we've tried some things in the past. I know my predecessors have, so there's some thoughts to that. And as far as going forward with species, there's some of our older species like American elm making a big comeback. We have a lot of our cultivars now, that are Dutch elm disease resistant. Faster growing tree. If you remember years ago, I'm old enough to remember the big arching branches in trees. That's our big American elm. So you'll be seeing a lot more of those put in the city. They'll grow 3 to 6 feet a year. So faster growing tree that can handle tough urban environments. We tend to not have the heaving issues as much, but they tend to like to have some surface roots. But there's some options from that standpoint as well.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Unless you have anything else to add.
Alder Lukens?
Sure. I think we've looked at construction. We tried to mitigate some of this with construction. We have looked at boring. One time we talked about boring underneath existing trees. However, homeowners don't want their laterals underneath trees. So if we put a brand-new lateral underneath a tree, I don't think that's a good way to go forward either, because if we do lose that tree or that tree dies, it's a big tree, now you tear that tree out and you could damage your lateral, or if it gets root intrusion or whatever. We did also look at offsetting laterals to maybe go around trees. Issue with that is if the lateral comes out of the home in one spot, now we offset our lateral and say it's a sanitary lateral, you're putting bends in somebody's sanitary lateral and you risk plugging. Or you force the homeowner to relocate their lateral, which is an additional cost to them. So there's issues with that too. The water main, not so much, but like John said, typically your water and your sewer main run in the same trench, one on top of the other. So those are the things we've looked at to try and mitigate tree, but none of them seemed very viable to me. We have talked, Milwaukee tends, they claim to be the tree gurus or there's individuals, so that they have individuals who are just there to protect trees. They have inspectors throughout the city that all they do is go around and inspect trees. And he actually came to the city and gave a speech, and I met with him and got some ideas from him. But one of the things I took away is, I took him out to a construction site and I showed him a large tree that was right alongside of a driveway that we just took out. And he claims that they've never taken a tree out during construction, which I'm like, how do you do that? So his answer was, well, we'd have came through 2 or 3 years before the construction project and we'd have taken those trees out. So then technically you're not taking them out as part of the construction project. I'm like, well, that's kind of cheating. But, but they do more than, they do tend, some communities don't, we put our back of our sidewalk right on the right of way. So the homeowner, and I would say in 95% of the city, the homeowner owns right up to the back of the sidewalk. Some cities move their sidewalks in a little bit and maybe have a little room to jog the sidewalks out. We in the city don't, for the most majority. If we want to jog a sidewalk out, we would have to get an easement or buy property from that homeowner to move that sidewalk around. So that's just a few of the challenges we have. Not to say we can't do better, but it's just stuff we've looked at and challenges we have.
Thank you.
Sure.
Alder Lukens?
Thank you. I have another question for you, John, and just a few questions in general. So I've learned the hard way. I live on the southeast side, and one of the things I loved, one of the reasons I bought the house I live in is because of the trees, and I've lost 4 of them now, 2 because of sewer and water issues and different things like that, and then 2 because of storms. So I've had to spend a lot of money having those taken down. And one thing I learned last year, and I know, John, I just want to say thank you again, because your knowledge, he has spoken to our neighborhood group, and just handled some other resident concerns of our area. And I've been very impressed with your level of knowledge and expertise, and I really appreciate it. So one thing that I learned last year when I had to have my trees taken down is about the root structure, and the arborist that took mine down said a lot of the trees on the boulevard that were planted like long before were planted too deep, because they're, the soil is right up, really covering the roots. And he's like, if you can move some of that away, because otherwise the roots grow around the tree. And I know you know about this because we've already spoken about it. What I've had to learn if that weakens trees, would it be beneficial, like, for residents, to know that? Like, is there any information, I'm just wondering, that we can even put into the, the month or the seasonal newsletter or whatever, to try to get some information out to residents? Because, like, I was putting soil around a different one that's still living, and so I learned that and I took it away. But, like, things like that maybe people could, learn about, like, because that would help, I think, maybe save some of them. And I have the same concerns as you about, of course, we don't want to have to lose any trees because of climate and everything else. But anyway, I just wondering about your thoughts with that. Like, maybe by now, if some of these trees are planted long ago and they were, but maybe it's too late, or does that weaken it? Is that a concern of yours or no?
It certainly can be. There's certain species of trees that don't do well at all with being planted deeply. Lindens in particular, Norway maples, very sensitive to that. They have roots that actually will grow up into that soil, and they girdle themselves. They actually strangle themselves. And sometimes they won't actually outright die. They'll actually weaken themselves to an hourglass shape. And that's when you'll see storm damage. It'll actually just pop right out of the ground. Looks like there's no stump. Those things can certainly happen. So once it gets to a certain point, there's not a whole lot you can do. When those roots are small, you can sever them and work on them that way, but there's only certain things you can do. Species are riparian species, river bomb species, don't typically have a problem with that. Elms, river birch, they're in that zone where sometimes they get covered with dirt, sometimes water will wash away. They can handle those types of things. But a lot of our trees, which are higher, drier type plants, may have issue with that. Now, to address about helping educate our residents, we certainly could put together a little article, some short article in some of our newsletters. We find the right spots to put that out there. We absolutely could do that little info type articles about, we've done emerald ash borer a bit. We can do girdling roots, planting depths, and we talked about at your meeting, trees shouldn't look like a telephone pole. It should have that flare, right? That's the easiest way to see it. So we certainly can do things like that. And if you have requests by specific things, just certainly let us know.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
One thing we've been waiting on for, well, I think since I started 4 years ago, actually, is our new website that the city and the county are doing. I have heard, I know that we have a company that we've hired now. So I have been really looking forward to that because our whole website in general needs to be better and easier to read. But I envision, and this is part of our tree that we had put together a long time ago, I see us having an urban forestry section on our page that could have some of these resources too. Like we could have a how to plant a tree, or if you're going to remove a tree, here's what you should think about, or here's John's number that you can call, or most likely the email. That's been working really well if people email him with some issues. But I think we could have a very good education urban forestry page for people to get some of that information. We just haven't put a lot of effort into updating our current website because there's so much on it and it needs so much work that soon. That's a good opportunity for us.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions for Alan or John? If not, I thank you very much, gentlemen.
Yes, thank you guys. Okay.
I'm going to move on to item number 5 on the agenda, and actually I'm going to strike that item because we will be addressing this as item 8 on the agenda. We sort of have item 5 and 8 duplicated. So I'm going to move on to agenda 6, educational items. And A, of course, is Kickbook Plaza. I can't even talk today.
Yeah.
And I'm going to turn that over to Jamie.
This is just a very brief update on Kickbush Plaza. If you don't know where that is, it's the area right behind the library along the river. And there is a stage that has normally been put out there with a canopy that the River District purchased a few years ago. Going back and trying to do some research because we were contacted by the River District about taking over this or taking back this stage. We did find out that actually when it was purchased as an agreement to allow them to purchase it and put it in there, it became property of the city. So the city already owns the stage and the canopy. But what had been done was River District was helping to program that with some Sunday night jazz concerts and stuff like that with a certain group. They had only agreed to help this group start it, and Blake has told me with the River District that they are no longer going to be doing that programming, that the groups can still use it, but they're not going to be leading that charge. So he's the one who told us not to put it out this year because they weren't programming, but now what we were going to do is we have talked with him, and what we think would be best is we'll put it out each summer along with the canopy and the stage, and it will be there free to use for anybody who wants to use it as a first come, first serve basis. If we see that there's a lot of use and we need to start programming it or scheduling it, then that will come through our office. But I think for 2023, we'll put it out, we'll see how it's used, and have it on a first come, first serve basis. Just a little change to how that stage was done in the past.
Before I go on to B on the agenda, I just want to back up to the educational items. In your packet, it stated the fact that Wausau Whitewater Park dedication will be at 9:00 a.m. Sunday, August 21st, and they recommend and suggest that all committee members attend, and I'm looking forward to that. I think that should be very interesting. That was an exciting item that they went ahead and did so well with that Whitewater Park. Jimmy, again, I'm going to turn it over to you. Reminder to submit the park notes for the city.
Yep, so the park notes to the city is this, it was included in your last month's packet, and if you need it again, I can always email it to you, you can pick out that packet. But it's this packet right here that's got these boxes on.
Yeah.
Basically, it's to go through, like I did this off of, I didn't even have to go visit a lot of the parks, because I know a lot of them, so I'm sure you guys know a lot of them too, but, so if there's one you can't get to and you don't have anything written, that's fine. But if you could work on this, we had said from the MSA that if we could get it by today. I did let her know, because I had already been reached out by a few of you, that we know everybody's busy. So if you could take the time and try to get this done in the next week or two, I'll let her know that we're working on it. I'll get her my suggestions whenever you can get those to me. Let's say if we can try to get them maybe by the end of next week. So what's that, the
That would,
12th, I think,
yeah.
is that Friday?
Correct, that's August 12th.
Yeah, so if you could work on them, or maybe even through the weekend and get them to me that Monday, the 15th, that gives you 2 weeks to do as best you can. That would be wonderful. This will just be helping her go through and compile all of what we want, its needs and wants of each park, and she'll put them in that for our discussion point for our corp update. And then the survey is still open until the 11th or the 16th. I got too many dates. The 11th of August. As of today, we had 158 people take the survey, so we put out another push on Facebook this afternoon. That seemed to be the day that it got really spiked, where we had quite a few people do it after we had put it out the first time. So we put it out again today to remind people to take that survey, and that will help get feedback on what other people would like to see in the parks as well. So that's just working on that outdoor recreation plan.
And under Agenda 6C, Riverside Park remediation update, I understand there is no comments or nothing to talk about at this point.
Nothing further at this point, have not gotten
Okay.
any further information.
Then it gets to Agenda 7, future agenda items. I'm looking toward the committee if there are any additional items or future items that they would like to see on the agenda. If they could either email me or call me, that'd be greatly appreciated, or Jamie for that matter. Our next meeting date, that is to be determined. We've got a couple of dates. One, of course, you saw in the packet was Tuesday, September 6th at 4 o'clock prior to the Economic Development meeting, or Monday, September 12th at 5:45 following the HR meeting. And any idea what the September agenda will be? Jamie, do you think that will be short?
At this time, I don't have anything for the agenda for September, so it
Could be short.
It's also an option that we could decide not to have a September agenda at that time. If I don't have anything, we can just cancel that meeting as
Sure.
well. But I knew that it was on Labor Day, so I figured we better take a look at it in case.
How does the committee feel about that? Alder Watson?
I was wondering, is there any, could we have updates on the pools or anything like that? Because will they be closed? or
They will be
closing?
closed by then,
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And then dog park updates and/or new dog park location. Yeah, discussion.
So at this point, should we leave it then up to the Parks Director, that if there isn't really anything on the agenda, that we should just then go into October? Would you all be in agreement with that? Okay, I also. Do we need a motion on that?
Well, is there if we do have to have a meeting, is there one of the dates that works best or preferred?
Alder Killian?
Well, I think out of the couple that were mentioned, at least 3 of the members on this committee are also part of ED, so if it works for those members' schedules, it might streamline nicely if it was brief and before the ED meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that, yeah?
Yeah, September 6th at 4, that would be fine.
Okay.
If it has to be, that would be okay with me. Any other questions or comments? Then I'd like to take a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Watson and a second by Killian. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Have a great, fair weekend.
Yes.
I should say.
It's actually, that's not in the park, or it is in the
Nope, it's
park?
not in the park. It's behind the park across from Jefferson.